Hey guys, what's up? Today I'll be doing a video counting down my personal top 10 records from the country of Sweden. Sweden is definitely, in my opinion, one of the finest of the metal scenes. They have a lot of variety in all different kinds of music. So I'm definitely glad I'm able to count down my top 10. And this is my personal list, and I can almost guarantee it will not be the same as yours. This is not the most definitive 10, it's just my personal 10. But real quick, 3 honorable mentions, I'll just blaze through them. Crystal Age, Far Beyond, Divine Horizons, 1995, really solid, OSDM coming out on the tail end of the era. Pretty technical, really unique, great record. And then Vinterland, Welcome My Last Chapter, solid melodic black metal, really emotional, great record. And finally, a little bit of a more modern one, censor that, Life Lover, Pulver, really hated band and really hated album. I think they're so hated just because they get lumped into black metal. This is an excellent record, but do not go into it expecting a black metal record. It's really like pop, Joy Division, and The Cure gothic metal, if you could even call it metal. It's more like rock pop, but it's a super interesting record, and I like it a lot. So Life Lover, Pulver. And now onto the list, starting at number 10, Entombed, Left Hand Path. This one is an absolute classic of Sweden and of the whole death metal genre. There was stuff going on in the scene before this, but I feel like when this came out, it really solidified that HM2, the really gory sounding, down-tuned death metal that would become synonymous with Sweden. And in my opinion, Entombed did it best. When it comes to old school death metal, I've always been more of a fan of how the Americans did it, but this one is definitely a contender for, one of the best old school death metal records. It's just so unique, and it holds up all this time later. It's not something that sounds stale. Left Hand Path is a classic song, Drowned, and then there's some cool, I don't know if they were originally bonus tracks, but Carnal Leftovers and Premature Autopsy are just really great songs. This record has a ton of energy, and I'm sure everybody's heard this one by now, but it is definitely an absolute banger and an absolute classic. So yeah, number 10, Entombed, Left Hand Path. Number 9, from 1992, At the Gates, with their first full-length album, The Red in the Sky Is Ours. And this is a very, very different sound than what At the Gates would later do with records like Slaughter of the Soul. It's a lot more raw and kind of a lot more caustic. The vocals are almost even black metal tinged on here. They have a really high register, and the screams are really abrasive. But underneath all that angst and all the caustic sounds, there are some really nice melodies going on here, which is kind of what At the Gates is definitely known for, pioneering melodic death metal. And they do it very well on this record. It's not quite as melodic as they would go on to be, but I think this is them at their best because they can combine just that really raw, caustic aggression with some really, really pretty melodies. Songs like Kingdom Gone, Through Gardens of Grief, The Scar is like a little nice filler track that just sounds really emotional and really pretty. And this is also a kind of like a strangely technical album. If you really listen to it, the focus is usually on like the vocals and the melodies, but there's quite a bit of like weird rhythms and technicality going on here if you really listen to it. So I think that's pretty neat. Very strange sounding record. But I think, in my opinion, although honestly I haven't given a listen to Slaughter of the Soul in years, this is my favorite At the Gates. So yeah, number 9, At the Gates, Red in the Sky Is Ours. And coming in at number 8 is Soils of Fate, a really good brutal death metal band from Sweden, right up the vein of the Dying Fetus, like hardcore beatdown style of brutal death metal. And yeah, this is a really good record. It's very straightforward, but it also has a lot of charm when it comes to the songwriting or how they build up their breakdowns and slams and just really bring the whole song crashing down with these powerful, powerful riffs. Yeah, this is just a record that's super, super fun to listen to. When it comes to Soils of Fate, everyone rightly compares them to Dying Fetus because it does sound a lot like, Killing on Adrenaline, early 90s or early 90s era Dying Fetus. It's just a super good record. The opening song, Killers Beware, it's got some funny lyrics. It's like if LA gangster rap was from Sweden, but they played brutal death metal. And yeah, it's just a solid listen. Ruben Rosas from Devourment does a couple guest vocals on some tracks. And yeah, everything about this record is just gnarly. Kevin Taylor, who also played in Dying Fetus, is on drums. So there are some really big names on here. And yeah, it's a great album. Not too much to it, just like kind of hardcore inspired brutal death metal. So Soils of Fate, Crime Syndicate at number 7. Number 6, this is Unanimated with Ancient God of Evil. I think this came out in 1995. And this is some really, really pretty melodic death metal. And this record and this band, when it comes to melodic death metal, some bands may choose to go the more death metal route, go the more melodic route, or blend them. And Unanimated is definitely on the more melodic side. There is not much aggression in this at all, and I have no problem with that. This is a record I really reach to when I just want to hear like super beautiful tremolo-picked melodies with a lot of heavy metal influence. I think that's where this record really shines. There's like hardly much traditional death metal riffing on here at all. It's all about those really elegant, the glorious sounding tremolo-picked melodies. And it's another one of those records that's pretty straightforward, but it's just 9 tracks of really, really nice sounding melodic death metal. But it's also one that doesn't overstay its welcome. The songs don't go on too long. They're simple enough to follow along, and some have like really catchy choruses, like the ending track, Die Alone. That's one that comes to mind. It's just really easy to get into, and these melodies are some of the best that Sweden has to offer, in my opinion. Unanimated, Ancient God of Evil. This is another one that's like, I've noticed in the last couple years, since I think this was like reissued, this got a lot more recognition, which I think is good because it deserves it. Really, really solid record. And it sounds a lot like another band that is going to be on this list a bit towards the end. So yeah, Unanimated. And I believe this is number 6. Seance for Never Laid to Rest. I absolutely love this album. Seance is an old school death metal band, and I think this came out in 1992. But this doesn't sound really like Swedish death metal. Usually this band is described as a Swedish band playing death metal in the Florida style, which is very accurate because, this doesn't have the HM2 sound at all, and it just sounds like a lot of the bands that were coming out of Florida and the more sound studios at the time. So definitely a lot of like Deicide influence, maybe a little bit Morbid Angel, and definitely some of the New York bands like Suffocation, Malevolent Creation, just that really like high energy, semi-technical death metal, but also infused with the thrash elements, but not the thrash elements that like tone it down, like the ones that, make it like more extreme, if that makes any sense. But yeah, this is a really good album, and if you haven't heard it and you like any of the bands I said it sounded like, definitely check it out because this thing rips and it has a lot of ferocity to it. Just super heavy. I mean, just put on the first track, Who Will Not Be Dead, and you're gonna know what I'm talking about. Like really gnarly, like chokes on the cymbals, and the bass and drums are just so lined up. Yeah, I don't really have anything bad to say about this album. I really think this one is underrated. especially if you're a fan of like more sound style Florida death metal. Yeah, this thing just goes really hard, and it is a really, really intense record. You know, pretty technical at times, like even like monstrosity level technicality. Like not as flashy as maybe like Millennium would be, but definitely some pretty crazy, intense, complex riffing style on here at times. Yeah, this is just a really, really awesome listen. Seance for Never Laid to Rest. And at number 5, we have Panzer Division Marduk by Marduk. This is a really, really aggressive, in-your-face black metal album that will just pummel you to the ground. I'm not the biggest black metal listener, but this has been one that I have been getting really into the last couple months. And I like it just because it is just so in your face, so straightforward, and there literally is nothing else to it other than tremolo picked riffs and blast beats. I mean, that is the entire album, song 1 to the end. And it is a really, really good listen, and somehow between all that chaos, it doesn't manage to get muddy at all. Everything is very well done. The songwriting's clear, and this thing is just crazy. It's played with such energy that it makes the songs feel way faster and crazier than they are. Like when I listen to this record, like I think the drums are like just going lightning speed, like 240, 250 BPM. But then when I really like tried to play along to it, it's actually only like 205 to like 215. Like the whole record is in that tempo range, which is strange because when I listen to it, like it's just played with so much intensity and so much power. It just feels like it's way faster than it is, which I think is really neat how they did that, because it's just you know, this album feels so crazy when you listen to it, but if you were to adapt it to, you know, a guitar or drums, it's like really not that hard. But yeah, I think it's neat how they did that, and I really like the World War II theme here. There's some cool songs and lyrics. Yeah, this thing really does just feel like the German war machine coming right at you, because that is how intense and pummeling this record is. Marduk with Panzer Division Marduk. Coming in at number 4, this is Spawn of Possession with their first album from 2003 titled Cabinet. Spawn of Possession is a band that played a very, very technical style of technical death metal. And what I love about this band and this record is it's the technical death metal that doesn't completely rely on like sweeps or that kind of like really dissonant. Like it's not like modern tech death with all the sweeps and dissonance and stuff like that. It's definitely technical death metal played like in the old school style, but with even more technicality and hints of some of those sweeps and dissonance. But yeah, this record is just like really crazy. I would say I'm sure it's not, but at least what I listen to, like I think it's one of the most technical albums that doesn't rely completely on that style of sweep picking and stuff like that. The drums are really, really well done. Why am I blanking on his name? Dennis Rondum. He is one of the most underrated drummers. I mean, when it comes to talking about speed, no one really says this guy's name a lot. It's kind of a shame, and I know from what I've heard, he also did vocals, and later in this band's career, he opted to do vocals live instead of drums. But yeah, he was just an insane drummer, like really hitting crazy speeds. There's some 300 BPM blasts on here. Everything about this record is just nuts. Favorites are Hidden in Flesh, title track, Spawn of Possession, Church of Deviance. Yeah, just some really, really crazy over the top technical songs on here. And they still manage to be, I'd say, like fairly accessible. If you like regular death metal, you can probably at least respect this album. But yeah, it is pretty crazy. Production sounds great too. Yeah, this is just a very, very solid and entertaining album. So number 4, Spawn of Possession, Cabinet. And coming in at number 3, Dissection, The Somber Lane. I've talked about Dissection in another video, and this is just one of my long-standing favorites. The mix of melodies, the combination of black and death metal with a lot of classical acoustic guitar makes this, in my opinion, just one of the classics and best albums in the entire metal genre. I'm not going to talk about this one too much because I've pretty much reviewed it before, and I love this album. Great haunting melodies, cool use of guitars, and all that good stuff makes this one of my favorites. Dissection, The Somber Lane. And now for the final 2. These are pretty much my 2 favorite records of all time, give or take. It's kind of interesting because I don't usually listen to a lot of or when it comes to my favorites, most of the stuff I'm listening to is old school death metal or brutal death metal. But for some reason, these 2 albums, are not really in that style, but they come at the top of my favorites of all time. So number 2, Catatonia, Dance of December Souls. Just an absolute great effort and really creative output of gothic and depressive style of downbeat metal. This is given a lot of names: doom metal, gothic metal, whatever you want to call it. This thing is filled with emotion, it is filled with sadness, and it is filled with beauty. Not to mention the vocal performance by Jonas is just absolutely one of a kind. I know he's kind of mentioned his throat never recovered from the way he did the vocals on this record. And I mean, it was for the right cause, because the vocals on here are the most tortured and emotional style of high shrieks I've ever heard. And just in my mind, everything about his vocal output is worth it on here. Another thing I find really interesting about Catatonia is that a lot of other Swedish bands relied on these really elaborate and elegant style of tremolo-picked harmonies to create their melodies, while Catatonia just did it in a really drab, single-note fashion. A lot of these riffs are just played on one string, and, it's just going up and down the fretboard on one string, but it still sounds super beautiful and really, really emotional. This record is just, it's one I pretty much think about every single day. To me, it's that powerful. And it's also funny just because I'm not even into this genre really. It's just for some reason this band has spoken to me. It's not I listen to a lot of the gothic and doom metal really, but this album is just an absolute glory in the genre. A really sad record, really emotional, and yeah, it is just an amazing piece of work. So number 2, Catatonia, Dance of December Souls. And coming in at number 1, this was an easy pick because it's my favorite record of all time. And I've said the word melodies a lot today, and if there's one band and record to rule them all, then it is definitely Opeth with their first album, Orchid. Oh my God. The best harmonies and the best melodies you will ever hear in music, period. That is what I would say about this album. And, we could go into Opeth changing their sound and losing that style of melodic death metal, but I'm just glad we had a couple outputs that they did in that style to listen from. And this is about tied with Morning Rise, but I'd say this is my favorite from Opeth for the reason of the harmonies. There's a clear Iron Maiden influence in the way they approach their harmonies, but in my mind, they outdid them completely because they added elements of just sadness, sorrow, and so much emotion in these harmonies. First track is, my single favorite song of all time, In the Mist She Was Standing. Right when you put that song on, that intro never, ever fails to captivate me. The way the 2 guitars not even sync up, but it's like they're not approaching harmony in the traditional method of transposing a riff up a fifth or down a third or anything like that. They utilize two completely separate guitar parts that weave harmonies together, and it's just a really, really interesting way of going about writing music. I haven't really heard that style approached in a lot of other bands. It's just very, very unique, and it is, so emotional, so sad. That's what I love about early Opeth, really, and what I think they lost, where they lost me personally as a fan later down the road is the emotion on here. The lyrics combined with the hauntingly beautiful melodies are just incredibly, incredibly lonely, sad, and depressing, but at the same time, hopeful and inspiring is, I guess, the best way I can describe this record. And of course, you have very long compositions with a lot of acoustics and a lot of progressive elements, great bass playing. Everything about this album is just a masterpiece, in my opinion. And it's an easy choice for me, saying that this is my personal favorite record of all time. So coming in at number 1, Opeth, Orchid, and that will conclude the list. So if anyone wants to drop their list in the comments, I always like reading that stuff. Thank you for watching.